I'm Shehla Pervin. I'm an associate professor at the division in College of Medicine, internal medicine.
Hi, I'm Paul Robinson. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Surgery in the College of Medicine here at Charles Drew University.
You know that why did I even choose to study African American triple negative breast cancer? The reason was that it is extremely poorly understood, this disease. Very little is known about the biology of the disease, so that is why usually in general African American women, they are less likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer, but when they are diagnosed, they are high, the prognosis is very poor. The mortality rates are very high. These cancers are usually diagnosed at stage 4. They usually have metastasized to various organs, usually the bone or the liver. There is no treatment for this. That's why we started writing these NIH, NCI grants, and when we got the grants, the main focus was to devote all our attention and all the money from the NIH just to understand their biology. So over the years, before we started out, we found out that just 3 or 4 things was known about these tumors. But this information was just not sufficient to really gear up an effective treatment strategy for these tumors. So we knew that there was a lot of work needed to be done. We have found out that the microenvironment plays a very important role. There's a unique adipocyte that is in the microenvironment of these African American triple negative breast tumors, and these are the beige adipocytes. Somehow these beige adipocytes, they start to crosstalk with these tumor cells, and also they induce increased macrophage infiltration. So there is a 3-way crosstalk between the adipocytes, the tumor cells, and the macrophages. This was one of the important findings. We also found out that these aggressive cancer cells that usually do not respond to even aggressive chemotherapeutic regimen or the cocktail, what happened was they were very sensitive to nitric oxide. So nitric oxide, it usually comes in a chemical compound. You can just put in the chemical compound in the vicinity of these cells, and somehow these cells, they start to crumble and undergo death, cell death. This sensitivity was much higher than other Caucasian breast cancer cell lines. So this was really exciting, just to understand that the biology of these tumors are very different, and they really respond to some chemicals, and that could be utilized for treatment strategy. So I'm really excited because I got my SC1 renewed this year for the next 4 years. So definitely that is my priority is to understand scratch the surface, to go into the depth, to understand all these unique pathways that are involved in initiating and progressing these aggressive tumors. And I'm really confident that at the end of these 4 years, we'll really have a lot of information and definitely a effective therapy in place.
Okay, so my research is focused on the intersection of geography and place and health behaviors and health outcomes, as well as health systems. So I've been involved in a variety of research projects that specifically are looking at health disparities and health outcomes to understand the explicit role that where people live, and even beyond that, what the role of prior residence areas in space and time, how that leads to the types of variations in health that we see beginning. Because when people think about health and health outcomes, they generally think about biology, cells, microscope, genomes. But what science is showing is that these things actually are influenced by the macro, the exposome that they occur in. And so the tools that we are actually engaged in are able to take data that exists that has not yet been used in the health realm and link that to advances at the cellular level. So if you think about future activities related to how do we address health disparities, we already know that for example, some research that we've done, we've shown that independent effects of whether you have geographic access to supermarkets independently influences your nutritional behavior. So whether you control for age, gender, being married, your knowledge of nutritional guidelines, independently, if you live in an environment that doesn't have as many major chain supermarkets, you won't eat as many fruits and vegetables. And so these things are just like the biology beyond personal will or an individual's ability to overcome. And so we study things at this macro level that have ramifications for health behaviors and health outcomes. Just like other biologists that I work with study things at the micro level. So, about is in light of the increasing knowledge of the role of epigenetics and expression of genes, where I was taught in biology that a gene is this thing that exists forever and is immutable, but now we're seeing that genomes, the expression of genes is influenced by local geography, local environments, and I've heard about experiments where like you change the composition of the air or something and see expressions. Do you see a future role? And I know that this will be cutting edge science that may not yet exist, but the NIH is interested in funding these types of things, where we take the macro and the micro data and using things like geography and tracking individuals and cohort studies, actually try to understand how, for example, this unique cellular process for breast cancer that you observe amongst a cohort of people, African Americans, who have a unique history in space and time, how that environment has possibly influencing the expression of the whatever SNPs or cellular processes that are occurring to cause these tissue changes.
I do think there is an opportunity, because our research is well positioned to understand the tumor cells that have already mutated versus the existing microenvironment. Now that microenvironment is actually the result of the macroenvironment that the person has undergone, right, over the decades. And the macro environment has been there since birth, and that impression was already there. Now people have found out that, of course, the day-to-day, the decades of, the onslaughts of, everyday living, eating, and of course, the experiences that has gone in, that has kind of an impression on, it's just not the DNA sequence, it's the epigenetics that's, as Dr. Robinson is pointing it out, is that the epigenetics is those proteins that kind of, configures and kind of modulates the sequence. So the impression of the histones that are on top of the top of the DNA sequence, that impression is there from the mother to the child throughout, and then of course the onslaughts of the environment. And that is a very, very stable kind of changes. The methylation, that is one of the very
DNA
significant.
methylation.
Yes, that is some of the very, now for cancer, as you all know, genes, the oncogenes and the DNA suppressor genes. Now people are now finding out that it is a methylation of these genes that is kind of, that is kind of reflecting on the expression of these ones, and it is kind of dependent on, it is also kind of regulating whether the tumors will initiate or the tumors will undergo recurrence after a number of years, or whatever those changes will be. So these have actually been done in the last decade, but nobody has actually related it to the environment, to the macro environment. So as you're very interested in co-linking the type of the epigenetic signature on the particular type of zip code,
right,
and then type of correlating it with the occurrence of cancer, whether it is triple negative or ER positive, and things like that. I think it is really, really interesting, and like I was saying, that I'm really, really interested, and thank you for pointing it out. So this is kind of, I never ever thought about that. At one point I could even think about doing some kind of this study, but now with this conversation I'm really, really interested, and then it is actually doable. Because I kind of did some literature survey research, and we don't need, we just need some kind of a sputum or some urine. Any of these fluids will be enough to do the analysis. And then
And
I
a zip
spoke
code.
to, yes,
And a
correlating it to the
residential
zip
history,
code. So
actually.
Dr. Robinson, I know I have been here for for 10 years now at CDU, and at 2009, we met and you were discussing about a lot of your very interesting work, and at that time we knew that there was a food desert in this area, and we said that your work is really, really important. Now after 10 years, now we understand that we have become very, very conscious about this food desert and also lack of doctors, all of this thing which your work is highlighting and pointing it out to us. I just wanted to ask, you see that 10 years hence, what do you see, how will all of these change?
Well, I think that it's really...
and all the hardships that you've faced.
Sure. I think that a lot of what we just talked about is the direction that we'd like to see things go. It's really that there is kind of there's been traditionally a divide between, say, social scientists and basic scientists and clinicians over here and epidemiologists here. But I think that one of the things that, and that's been a challenge here at Charles University, but I think that what's happening now is that a lot because of the NIH, efforts are coming to allow us to take advantage of advances in each individual discipline and work at the intersection of that. So I think that for various reasons, many of us have operated kind of in our silos because it worked for us. But I think that now could be the time, when you ask 10 years now, 10 years from now, that's the kind of vision I have, where we've been able to take some of the leading edge stuff from different areas and marry it so that we're asking and answering questions that are not even being addressed in the larger scientific community. But if we can understand some of these pathways and then change behaviors or environments that are causing the replication of these alternate pathways, then that is kind of what we want to see. So if there is an epigenetic force that is, through generations has created this mutation, of course we need to be able to treat it, but also there might be a way to kind of change environment and reverse that through generations so that the health profiles of African Americans or of Latinos or of Indian Americans or whatever are more in line with what standards are for health. Thank you, Dr. Pervin.
Thank you very, very much. You gave me a new insight, a new direction to my research. I'm really grateful.
And you gave me a hope that an area that I've been thinking about for a while, we could actually bring into operalization.
So let's continue a dialogue. I'm really, really interested.
Yes, definitely. That will happen.